Hi there, Steve Coffin here, and today I want to talk about listening comprehension, how to improve our listening comprehension based on my experience. Remember that listening comprehension, at least for me, is the fundamental goal, the fundamental activity. You want to understand what people are saying. If you can understand movies, if you can understand podcasts, if you can understand conversations, the other end of the conversation, you can eventually get to where you can hold up your end of the conversation. I spend most of my time listening. Listening comprehension is where the action is, in my opinion. Of course, I mentioned reading as a way to increase your vocabulary so that later on when you hear these words, you might have a chance to understand them. But listening comprehension is where I spend most of my time. But before I get into more detail, I want to tell you two stories. So first of all, the first takes place in St. Petersburg, Russia. I had been studying Russian for 4 years, I guess, off and on. I listened to audiobooks of Russian literature. I listened to political discussions from a radio station. I understood a lot of Russian. And I'm in St. Petersburg. I want to buy a train ticket to go to Vyborg, which is just north of St. Petersburg, on the electric train, Elektrichka. And so I'm waiting in line, and finally it's my turn to tell the lady there behind the counter what I wanted. And there's a certain amount of trepidation here, using the language in not to listen to political discussion, but to use it in a very practical, specific situation. And I say I would like to buy a ticket to go to Vyborg. And she comes back at me with something, and I didn't understand what she said. And I had to repeat and ask her to repeat. And finally, whatever she said, I can't remember. I got the picture and I paid her and I got my ticket. So that's one situation. Another situation, we have a Mexican gardener here in Palm Springs. And we were talking about different things. And all of a sudden he said, hay problema con el pau. I said, what? Pau. Pau. What's pau? And finally, I figured out it was pago. It had to do with his payment. Somehow his bank transfers weren't going through. What's the significance of these two little stories? I have found time and time again that in order to understand a particular context, you kind of have to have experienced it before. So you have to be able to anticipate what is coming at you. And if you have not had that particular situation before, it will be more difficult. So the second time or the third time that I go to buy a train ticket in Russia, it'll be easier for me because I've already experienced it. I can anticipate what the person is going to say. Similarly with this Mexican gardener, if I knew kind of roughly the context, what he was talking about, I might have been able to connect the fact that pago to him was almost pau, or at least I heard it as pau. And this is important because there's so many different accents. Even within a particular accent, people have different ways of pronouncing things. So it's very important to therefore be able to anticipate. And what that means is when you don't understand, don't criticize yourself. Don't blame yourself. The fact that you're in a situation where you don't understand is a good thing because you have now time to think about that. And so next time around, you probably will do better. I mean, you can do things just by dint of doing a lot of listening. You are exposing yourself to more different situations. Even if you're, watching a series on Netflix, you're sort of involved now in an environment. It might be a family, it might be gosh knows whatever is happening, and as you spend more and more time in that situation, you're gradually going to understand more because you're becoming familiar with what people say to each other within that particular context that you have been sort of catapulted into. So I only want to make this point because I think people sometimes get very upset if they feel they have a good level of comprehension and then they're put in a very specific situation and they have trouble understanding what is said. No harm done. You ask the person to repeat, as I did with the Mexican gardener, or with, I shouldn't say Mexican, he's an American, but he doesn't speak English, here in Palm Springs, or with the lady selling the train ticket in St. Petersburg. I just ask again. And my advice in terms of listening comprehension is, expose yourself to as many different accents, as many different situations, as many different contexts as possible, and recognize that there will always be situations where even some of the most basic bits of vocabulary will pass you by, things that you think you should be able to understand, you won't understand them, and that's just part of improving your listening comprehension. And that's why I should say, by the way, that exposing yourself to speaking situations, not being afraid to make mistakes, not being afraid to not understand, having one situation where you didn't understand, and you go back in there again, and the third time you will understand that particular context, and there are so many other contexts that you need to, expose yourself to. So a big part of language, in progressing in our languages, is having a sense of confidence, and that means not becoming overly concerned about situations where you didn't understand. Just keep going. So I have talked before about listening comprehension, and I'll leave you with a couple of videos on the subject. I hope this is helpful. Bye for now.